So, we're now going to look at some of the musical aspects of Lizbie Browne, which I hope will help you in your enjoyment of the song. I'll try not to get too technical, but there are some fairly straightforward things that one can point out about the way Finzi went about composing his setting, which I hope are of interest. Now, I will play some aspects on the piano. I can sing the song, but I don't sing it as well as quite a lot of other people do who have recorded it, so I'm not going to give a complete performance, but hopefully I can show some of the examples to help underline the points I want to make. Now, the poem, as we've said, is very straightforward in some ways, but actually for a musical setting it poses quite a lot of problems, because the repetition of Lizbie Browne could become wearisome if the musical setting was the same all the time. And I think one of the first things to notice about Finzi's setting is the way in which he judiciously uses a rising idea but doesn't use it every time. Now, the way that he uses that rising idea is also very important. So the first time that we hear her salutation, "Dear Lizbie Browne, where are you now?" we hear it in that rising figure. Finzi uses that 5 times in the 9 stanzas, in the odd numbered stanzas. But in other places he uses a different musical idea. But he also uses that musical idea in the accompaniment as a way of tying the piece together. So we hear it right at the outset. "Dear Lizbie Browne," and so on. So it's shared between the voice and the piano, but very judiciously used throughout the song. I think Finzi gets the balance just right. Now, you might have noticed what I think is another of the key points about this song's success. When it starts off, you might be thinking, oh yes, there's a nice straightforward English song in 4/4 time. But when the voice comes in, "Dear Lizbie Browne," that bar has 5 beats in. And it pretty soon becomes apparent that Finzi is going to change the meter, the number of beats in each bar, as the piece goes on in a very free way. He doesn't do this by not having any bar lines or anything like that, but he does it by changing the meter regularly. And he also marks the piece to be performed senza rigore, without rigor, without a beat, and gives this note: this beat should be flexible and wayward, with crotchet equals 104 as a metronome mark, as no more than a touchstone. Such suppleness cannot, of course, be determined by directions on paper, and the modifications of speed which are given should only be considered as an outline. So Finzi is saying it's all up to you, which actually makes this a very difficult song to bring off, because a song that is in 4/4 time and pretty strict rhythm all the way through, with few changes of speed, is much easier to sing in many ways than something where the composer says be flexible. And what each performer, both the singer and the pianist, is trying to do in a performance of this piece is to try and find out what Finzi might have had in mind. And of course that is tremendously exciting for us as listeners to hear what conclusions they reach. Now, moving to talk about harmony and key in this piece may sound a little bit academic, but bear with me because I hope you'll see why this is so important. Stephen Banfield, in his book on Finzi, has pointed out, and others as well, that this is a very interesting piece because there's only one accidental in the whole song. The piece is in E flat major, and there is one B natural. Otherwise, everything in the piece is within the notes of the E flat major scale. Now, we're going to look at that B natural separately shortly, but first of all, let's see how Finzi handles this idea of using the scale of E flat. So the piece has started off pretty substantially in E flat major. We know where we are from that point of view. But as the piece develops, so Finzi develops his approach to those notes in the scale, and particularly, rather than beginning on an E flat, has harmonic thoughts which begin on a C, but only use those notes out of the scale I just played. So that it has what we might say is a minor feel, but it's a minor mode feel. It actually is still using the A flat and the B flat that are there in the scale of E flat major. So you can see how that B natural is going to be standing out later on. Now, what Finzi does with this is to use two chords that particularly come out of that scale, which are C minor and G minor. And there you get your modal feel. And often those are as substitute chords for what would be chords in, if you harmonise the piece entirely in E flat major. If you did harmonise the piece entirely in E flat major, it would be very dull. And I offer the challenge to my musically adept colleagues to try playing through Lizbie Browne and putting E flat chords in place of the G minor chords and see what a dull piece it quickly becomes. So these chords are very important. So we've looked at the first harmonisation, Lizbie Browne. If we turn to the next one for stanza 3, we're still firmly in E flat major. And Lizbie Browne, who else had her? So at this point, the music is in remembering mode, remembering Lizbie Browne as she was. And there is, this is my theory, a happiness there, a freshness of E flat major. When we get to the 5th stanza, I, Lizbie Browne, so swift your life, and mine so slow. And here we are in our exploration of time. The music shifts. In E flat, I, Lizbie Browne, so swift your life. That Lizbie Browne is our minor mode, G minor, followed by C minor. What happens in the 7th stanza? In the 7th stanza, he mixes it up a bit. Dear Lizbie Browne. There's our two G minor chords there. I should have thought. Follows it. He's looking back again. Interestingly, when it comes to the 9th stanza and the last time that he harmonises that phrase in the voice, we're back pretty closely to the harmonic style of the opening, because he's come to his resolution, I think. After that beautiful lost Lizbie Browne, he resolves. So Lizbie Browne, when on a day men speak of me as not. That wonderful Hardy line, which comes, that sentiment, in so many Hardy poems, and therefore set, of course, by Finzi, where people think of the person who's died as not being anymore. But for that final one, Finzi, because there's that resolution, goes back to a very similar harmonisation to the opening. But of course, if you already know this song, you know that's not the last time that we hear the musical idea. Because Finzi's setting finishes by giving us that phrase in the piano. And it leaves us in midair. We don't know where that song might go. We don't know what harmonisation it may have. It's just left hanging, and it's given to the piano to finish it off. And I think that's a really imaginative idea. So what about our famous B natural? Where does Finzi choose to put that in? Well, he puts it in just before the singer moves to that understanding, to that resolution that I just mentioned. So where he says, I should have coaxed and caught you ere you passed, and coaxed and caught you ere you passed, dear Lizbie Browne. There's that moment, perhaps of realisation. But Lizbie Browne, I let you slip, shaped ne'er a sign. And we have all this regret pouring out of how he let it slip. So that harmonic touch, again, it's just in the right place. Well, I hope that's helped you to some thoughts about how this wonderful piece is put together. It doesn't always do to take a thing of beauty apart, but I think in this case it's due to Finzi to look at the care with which he handles particularly harmony and tonality in this piece. Because we all know that there's a school of thought that considers that composers like Finzi wandered around, that they let their fingers do the walking on the piano. I just can't subscribe to that, because although there may be occasions when Finzi found moving keys perhaps an interesting challenge, I'm not going to say any more than that. I think in this piece he got it absolutely right. And after all, we have to remember that Finzi, as a young man, studied with Bairstow, and if you've ever looked in Bairstow's book on harmony and counterpoint, you know what a rigorous grounding Finzi had. What he chooses to do with that grounding, that musically academic education, how much he chooses to reject, how much he chooses to observe, that of course is the composer's decision. And I think in Lizbie Browne he made some pretty good decisions.